Hello, I'm Jonasz Lewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express. As always, I hope you enjoy the journey. Now, in this episode, we're turning our attention to Kyrgyzstan, a country where political maneuvering is an art form, as Kyrgyz President Sadyr Japarov is halfway through his first term in power. Whispers are turning into murmurs, and murmurs into conversations about him seeking a second term. And let me tell you, Central Asia political schedules are about as reliable as a paper umbrella in a rainstorm. Kyrgyzstan has for some time been dubbed Central Asia's most democratic country. How does this situation look like over 3 years into Sadyr Japarov's presidential term? Let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
A Kyrgyz court has acquitted 22 defendants in the Kyrgyzstan's highest-profile political trial to date. The trial, which began in October 2022, involved politicians and activists accused of plotting to overthrow the government by opposing a controversial border deal with Uzbekistan. The acquittals mark a significant moment in Kyrgyzstan's judicial history, raising questions about the country's political climate under the President Sadyr Japarov. Among those acquitted was Azimbek Beknazarov, a former prosecutor general known for his tumultuous political career. The defendants, who had faced severe charges and long pretrial detentions, were greeted with celebrations by supporters following the verdict. The case has drawn international attention, with human rights organizations like Amnesty International hailing the acquittals as a victory for justice and human rights. The organization highlighted the politically motivated nature of the charges and the harsh conditions the defendants endured during their detention. President Japarov, who had maintained a hardline stance since taking office, insisted he had no influence over the court's decision. However, the unexpected acquittals have sparked speculation about potential shifts in his administration's approach to political dissent.
And now we're zooming in on Bishkek to examine the issue in greater detail. So let's rewind to how we got here. Japarov was elected in a snap presidential election in January 2021, following a wave of political turmoil. In the grand tradition of Kyrgyz politics, this wasn't just any election, it was paired with a referendum. The big question for voters: what form of government do you prefer? The options: stick with the parliamentary system or revert to a presidential one. Kyrgyz voters, perhaps tired of too many cooks in the kitchen, overwhelmingly opted for the presidential system, with 84% in favor. Japarov, with his own overwhelming majority of nearly 80%, waltzed into office. Only 39% of eligible voters cast their ballots, but hey, who's counting? Now fast forward to a few months to April 2021, and Kyrgyzstan held another referendum, this time to cement the new presidential system with a fresh constitution. Now, this new constitution, as it has been dubbed, shrank the parliament and introduced the National Kurultai, a traditional council that mirrors the parliament but without that pesky voter input. It also modified the presidential term structure, switching from a single 6-year term to 2 5-year terms. The referendum passed with 85% approval, although turnout was a dismal 36%. It's almost as if Kyrgyz voters were thinking, meh, we've seen this movie before. Given Japarov was elected under the old constitution, his current term is expected to last until 2027. But in Kyrgyzstan, expecting political events to follow a strict timeline is like expecting a cat not to knock over vases. Early elections often follow revolutions or significant political shifts. Across the border in Kazakhstan, we saw a similar dance take place. After President Nursultan Nazarbayev resigned in 2019, his successor, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, called for a snap election to solidify his position. Just 3 years later, after a constitutional referendum tinkered with the presidential term, Tokayev called another early election and secured his place once more. Central Asian politics is like a never-ending game of musical chairs. So why is Japarov's second term coming up now? The Kyrgyz government claims to have thwarted multiple coup attempts, jailed opponents and journalists, and introduced controversial legislation. They even redesigned the country's flag, which caused more drama than you might imagine. Japarov's two-term potential under the new constitution might just need a motivational poster slogan, "Hanging there, Sadyr." The reality is, while President Japarov running for a second term is a given, the timing is what keeps everyone guessing. Will we see an early election? Well, only time is going to tell. And now here to shed more light on the issue is our guest today, Bruce Pannier, representing the Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Pleasure is mine as well. And let us begin with the overall assessment of the situation in Kyrgyzstan. Where do you think does the country stand politically in comparison to other countries in Central Asia today?
Well, it's looking a lot more like the other Central Asian countries. I mean, Kyrgyzstan, for all its history, until recently anyway, was kind of an outlier. It was seen as the most democratic country in Central Asia, and it really was. A vibrant independent media, civil society, legitimate, genuine opposition parties. But under the new president, who was elected, he came to power in 2020, he was elected in 2021, they're starting to move a lot more in the direction of some of their Central Asian neighbors.
So moving in the direction of its neighbors, what does it mean in practice when looking at it, for example, from the constitutional perspective? Of course, we can exclude Turkmenistan because some people will say it is really far gone when it comes to autocracy. What about the other countries, though?
Well, one of the things that happened in 2021 after Sadyr Japarov was president of Kyrgyzstan, and one of the things he did in 2021 was to hold a constitutional referendum. It changed the constitution and gave most of the powers to the executive branch, meaning he pretty much has free reign to do what he wants as president. So a lot of things have changed in the country. Certainly, I had mentioned that they had a genuine opposition, and they still do. But there's new rules that limit the ability to demonstrate, gather publicly, protest. Media outlets, independent media outlets that were critical of the way he's been handling the country have encountered legal problems. Right now, there's 11 journalists that are in jail awaiting trial because of their reporting. So I mean, really across the board, the freedoms that distinguished Kyrgyzstan, the things that made Kyrgyzstan different than the other Central Asian countries, are all kind of fading away. So it's starting to look a lot more like Uzbekistan or Tajikistan or Kazakhstan, where the government rules, and if you want to question their authority or their decision making, you're going to run into problems very, very quickly. And in Kyrgyzstan's case, it even goes in some instances beyond what some of the neighbors have done. The standard charge for people when they write something about this decision by the government doesn't make sense, or we should go out and protest. Again, I'll give you one example. They decided they were going to change the flag and alter the state flag because the president thought it looked like a sunflower. So one guy said, let's hold a rally downtown in Bishkek. He was charged with calling for mass unrest and extremism. And that is like the standard charge. When you question the government's decisions, you can end up being charged with trying to foment a revolution in the country. And there's dozens of people that are being held in jail right now on that basis.
And that sounds disturbingly like Belarus. I mean, journalists being put in jail on trumped-up charges. What are the prospects for their release, though? There are reports that the judicial system is operating in a fairly unusual way, i.e., you basically level charges against someone. This person ends up in detention for a while. They are actually acquitted in many situations later on. So that makes it a bit unlike Belarus, where people often stay in jail for extended periods of time. What is your take on that?
I would agree with that to a certain extent. We just had a group of people released, 27 actually. They were had come out against a border deal with Uzbekistan a couple years ago that would have given, and in the end did give, Uzbekistan a key reservoir in an agricultural area in the south of Kyrgyzstan. And these people got together and decided that they were going to do something, come out against this plan before it was actually officially signed. And they were all arrested. Now, they were just acquitted, you're right. But in the meantime, they were arrested in October 2022, and the court decision just came. So effectively, they were sidelined for almost 2 years and kept from talking. Kept, like I said, most of them were kept in jail. Some of them were under house arrest. But during that long period where they were jailed, effectively it silenced their voices. So there was no protest. And when Kyrgyzstan agreed to hand over the reservoir to Uzbekistan as part of this border deal, there wasn't much public reaction to it, because the key people who had come out against it right at the start were already in jail, and it sent a message to society that if you were going to come out against this, this was what was going to happen to you also. And this is fairly typical of the way the Kyrgyz government has been operating.
And this message apparently is about to be reinforced big time with the new piece of legislation, which again, unfortunately, seems rather familiar. When you look at Russia, and by extension also Georgia, but obviously the prime example is Russia, does this piece of legislation differ in any meaningful way from the original? And also, why NGOs? Why, again, is this something that the government seems to be particularly afraid of?
Yes, you're referring to the Foreign Agents Law. In Kyrgyzstan, it's termed the Foreign Representatives Law, and it did pass. People have scrutinized this document and compared it with the one in Russia, and they found out that it's 95% copy of the one that Russia used to pretty much shut down independent media, civil society groups, across the board. And so Kyrgyzstan has it. They've been tentative. I mean, it just passed, so we still don't know what the repercussions of this are going to be in the end, but it certainly looks ominous when you look at it, because it is almost exact copy of the Russian law. So if you've been receiving any kind of money from outside sources, foreign sources, and you are critical of the government or engaged in some kind of activity that the government doesn't particularly like, they can resort to this law and close you down fairly quickly. You mentioned, we were talking about the judiciary a few minutes ago, and I should have mentioned that under the new constitution, the president appoints all the judges. So while those people were acquitted that I talked about, when it's going to come to the foreign agents, foreign representatives law, if there's a decision to be made about whether to keep these organizations open or close them down, it will be made by judges who were appointed or certainly are answerable to the president.
So these judges are likely to feel pressured into making decisions along a certain line. Coming back to the Foreign Agents Law, or its Kyrgyz version at least, do you think that it is likely that it will cause any sort of unrest, or is it more of a prospect, so to say, that this unrest will be very limited, unlike, say, in Georgia, where we've seen mass street protests? Do you think the same momentum even exists in Kyrgyzstan at this stage?
Kyrgyzstan's had 3 revolutions, so it's very hard to predict how the public's going to react. Things tend to build up and then snap fairly quickly, and in a matter of hours, but certainly a matter of a couple of days. There can be unrest in the country or mass demonstrations. That said, this government has again been consistently sending messages to people who criticize the government or challenge them on some point, that they're going to be arrested and put in jail and charged with serious offenses too. So it really has quieted the political activity in the country, certainly the opposition political activity in the country, which again was fairly energetic for most of its history. So at the moment, it would appear that the Kyrgyz government has a free hand and will be able to do pretty much anything they want. But again, the history of Kyrgyzstan since it became independent shows that these things can erupt fairly quickly and spread out through the country in a matter of, again, hours, but just a couple of days at the most. So I think the current Kyrgyz authorities are aware of this. That's why they're being very cautious in how they're moving. But they've certainly set the table to ensure that they're not going to have the problems that overthrew 3 previous governments in the country. And in fact, the head of security has warned that they're not going to sit there and stand for the similar events to the revolutions of 2005, 2010, and 2020 to happen again.
But it does sound interesting, because there are certain countries, Russia for example, where mass protests basically don't happen, at least not on a large scale. Do you think that this still could be considered to be a positive message when it comes to what we can tell about the Kyrgyz society today, that even though it might be dampened by the authorities, there still exists a rebellious civic spirit that does drive people to the streets occasionally when they see things happening and they say, no, we cannot allow this to continue that way, and so we have to do something?
Yeah, there's certainly precedent for that, and I would like to think that it's in the blood, so to speak. That the Kyrgyz have shown that again and again that there's a limit to what they're willing to accept, and that when the government forces things on them that they don't like, that they will react in any way they think is necessary, whether that's street protests, blocking roads, occupying government buildings, which has happened in the past too. That they have shown that they are willing to do that, and everyone knows the history. Everyone in Kyrgyzstan knows their own history, so that possibility. And again, that's why I said the current authorities are cautious about the steps that they're taking, because they understand that this is a possibility. But it's for those of us who are concerned about the direction Kyrgyzstan is taking. I think many take some consolation in the fact that the Kyrgyz people themselves are often the ones who end up deciding this when it's gone too far. And that's something that we'll have to see if it happens again. Like I said, the current government is doing everything they can to make sure that does not happen. But again, I think this is one of those things that's really out of the control of the government. If they take one step too far, and they've made a lot of controversial changes, if they take one step too far, they might find themselves being the victims of a fourth revolution.
And finally, because we are unfortunately approaching the end of the program, do you think that economic issues could perhaps be the decisive factor here? I mean, Kazakhstan at one point was almost tipped over the edge by issues related to the economy and not strictly to politics. Could this happen here as well?
This is a great point. Economics have played a role certainly in the 2010 election. That was a big part of it. It started, actually, the protest started because of a proposed raise in utility rates. But then it spread to, as these revolutions tend to do, they start to take on other issues, and it becomes much bigger than the original protest. In Kyrgyzstan's case, they've always had a hard time. It's an economically challenged country, I'll say. And at the moment, back to Russia, because of the changes in Russia and their attitude, the Kyrgyzstan sent more than 1 million migrant laborers to Russia and has for years because there were job opportunities there. Well, now a lot of the Kyrgyz people, certainly the young men who are going to Kyrgyzstan, are worried that they're going to be forced into the Russian army and sent to the Ukraine, and it's happened already. So that, plus the fact that the Russian economy is not doing so well, and they're having a harder time in the construction business and the areas where the labor migrants used to find employment. A lot of these people are coming back. I mean, even the Kyrgyz officials said recently that there's probably only about 500,000, maybe a little bit more Kyrgyz citizens who are now migrant laborers in Russia. Now, okay, what happens with the 500,000 that just returned? If there are not adequate employment opportunities for them, then it's going to be it's going to set the social pot boiling, so to speak. And people are going to start to vent their discontent and their frustration with the fact that they're back in their home country and they can't find work.
So, of course, this might be what it takes to once again increase the temperature of political dispute in Kyrgyzstan, but we'll have to wait and see. Bruce Pannier was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you. Always happy to be here.
And now it's time for Eastern News Flash, bringing you all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. Romania, Bulgaria and Turkey have begun a mine hunting operation in the Black Sea. The aim is to enhance shipping security, particularly for Ukrainian grain exports.
In response to maritime safety concerns in the Black Sea amid Russia's war against Ukraine, 3 NATO allies, Turkey, Romania and Bulgaria, have established a mine countermeasures task group. Their mission: to tackle drifting sea mines that pose a threat to shipping and key water infrastructure. The mines displaced due to the conflict increasingly endanger the only NATO countries with direct Black Sea access. Hence, this joint effort led by Turkey aims to make shipping safer, including for vessels transporting grain from Ukraine. The agreement between the countries marks the beginning of an operational planning phase expected to take several months.
As it turns out, a vast majority of Kazakh students studying abroad will never return to their country. The ongoing brain drain worries the country's officials, and analysts are trying to come up with a solution.
An analysis by the Kazakhstani portal Caravan reveals that approximately 80% of Kazakh citizens currently study abroad, and a staggering 90% of them do not intend to return to their home country. This phenomenon represents a significant brain drain, leaving policymakers pondering how to address it. The Kazakh education system often relies on outdated standards and theoretical approaches. The quality of education abroad and superior prospects makes graduates hesitate to seek employment in their home country, where finding jobs in their trained fields at comparable pay levels can be challenging. While most Kazakh students head to Russia, others explore different options. Over 1,000 students currently benefit from the presidential scholarship program studying in Europe and the United States. Kazakh students are also recruited by countries with negative population growth, such as South Korea, Singapore, and Japan.
Sri Lanka has formally requested compensation from Russia for its citizens who were forcibly recruited into the Russian military and subsequently killed or injured in the ongoing war in Ukraine. The demand was made by Sri Lanka's Foreign Affairs Minister during his visit to Moscow.
The Sri Lankan government is seeking reparations for the families of 17 Sri Lankan nationals who lost their lives and for those who were injured in Ukraine. Sri Lanka has also urged Russia to facilitate the return of its citizens still deployed on the front lines and allow for early contract termination. This move follows an investigation by the Sri Lankan parliament into the recruitment of at least 2,000 former soldiers, primarily by the Russian side. Reports indicate that over 300 complaints have been lodged by relatives of those recruited, with more than 20 individuals managing to desert and return to Sri Lanka. The Sri Lankan Foreign Ministry announced earlier in June that Russia had agreed to cease the recruitment of Sri Lankan citizens. Thousands of foreign fighters, however, have been recruited by Russia to fight in Ukraine, and their numbers remain unknown.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.